All right, long at last. The 12-team playoff is here. Before we get to picks and thoughts, let's review our preseason picks. I'm going to share my screen here quick if my internet allows me to do so. So, we had myself, I had an ACC. Weasel's been giving us crap about FSU for way too long, but I think a lot of experts picked some FSU. So I had Miami beating FSU, so I was definitely 0 for 2. Came close with Miami. I think a lot of us, most of us, had some sort of Oregon, Ohio State in the Big Ten title game. I had Nebraska and Penn State. So obviously, Penn State made the field. Nebraska made bowl eligibility. We'll take that. My Kansas Jayhawks figured out how to play football a little too late. And of course, Utah lost a bunch of guys and just plummeted quickly. West Virginia depended on the day. And looks like I got my SEC title correct. Obviously, tight game. I'm sure Turner has a lot of feelings about how the SEC title went. So I'd have to go back and see. I know on our pick sheet for point spreads each week, we all got several points for each of them, but it looks like I got a few correct. I got some Penn State, obviously not Florida State, Texas and Boise, Utah, Ohio State. Utah definitely did not make the cut, but the people who can see this on YouTube can see all the logos. My SEC, the SEC did not get as many. Well, you could make arguments for Ole Miss, South Carolina, Alabama. If they went to 16 teams, they'd all definitely be in. But obviously, the SEC did not get as many teams as they would have liked to. Turner had, and hopefully these are all accurate. Some of you picked multiple sleepers, so I did not get all of them in. Virginia Tech, you can see. Clemson wins ACC, so he snuck that one in there. Obviously, Florida State fell again. Iowa, I feel like Iowa is just above 500. I think that's correct. They had some really good weeks and some not so great weeks. But again, Ohio State tripping up against Michigan definitely hurt them big time. And we'll get more to that when we get to the bracket segment here. But some more corrects. I see Liberty in there, who I haven't heard about in a in a hot minute. But some correct, some incorrect. There's Turner's picks. We go over to Weasel's picks. I know he was pretty high on K-State. K-State, another team that could not find a way to win on the road, but they were indestructible, practically indestructible at home, which is kind of how they've played the last couple of years. NC State, I know, was a team they talked about really early on in the season. I know their transfer quarterback got hurt, and that did not help them, but NC State probably didn't perform as well as a lot of preseason experts and football fans would have suggested. I know, again, SEC, popular one was Georgia, Texas. And again, Ohio State falls short, but Oregon takes the Big Ten. Here's Weasel's picks in the bracket. Once again, pretty close to 50-50-ish. And on to Matt's. He had FSU and Clemson, like several of you did. Miami as a sleeper. Miami, of course, falling just short. I had a future on Miami to win the ACC championship and make the playoff, and both of them disintegrated like late. So that was fun. I also have a future on Cam Ward Heisman. So highly doubt he's a finalist, but there's a 0% chance he's winning based on who I believe will go top 2. So. And then, interesting enough, Matt had some Michigan action. He had some Tennessee, which obviously made it. He kind of went off the grid a little bit with Memphis. Not really off the grid, but there were several teams in the group of 5 that definitely had some potential. Here is Matt's bracket. Obviously, Oklahoma State in there did not have the season they wanted to have. Speaking of the Big 12, I saw reports, I don't know how accurate they are, that Cam Rising is coming back for another year, but I don't know how accurate that is. So let's get to the actual bracket. I'm going to zoom out here in just a moment. So we, of course, go to the actual bracket. Here is the actual bracket, actual seeds, actual teams. We're going to go through some initial thoughts on any format, on the field, the rankings, anything anyone wants to talk about. I'll just start. I think they will quickly look at how they seed this. I know I've watched several YouTube shorts and all sorts of videos. Sounds like someone's snorkeling in the background. But I think they're eventually just going to seed this, maybe even like the BCS. Obviously, many of us remember the BCS days where only 2 teams went to the title game and everyone else went out to all these bowl games before everyone started opting out of any game that wasn't the national championship or a semifinal. I still feel like conference championship game winners should get an auto bid, but I don't think they should get a bye. I do I think Oregon, Georgia, Texas, and I would say Penn State should get a bye. Obviously, I don't like Notre Dame, so I keep Notre Dame out of it. I think that loss to Ohio State killed them in a lot of seeding, obviously, even though they still get a home game. I think Arizona State and Boise getting a bye over Texas, Ohio State, and some others is ridiculous. It might have sounded good when we were just dreaming of this playoff, but now that we see it laid out and some different teams having, and I'll talk about it here in a moment, it's a lot easier routes to the semifinals than others, just based on who fell into their segment of the bracket. I think they will just adjust a lot of the seating when they take a look at this in the future. I don't know how early they would move to 16 teams rather than 12, but if you go to 16 teams, 17 and 18 are going to be mad. So I think they could easily. I was always confused when they posted these on Tuesdays because they'd have their bracket ranking and then they'd have their ranking, and I'd have to look, but I think Clemson's like 15. But obviously they won the ACC, so that was their only way in, which obviously kicked Alabama out, among other things. But I still think they need to put value in conference championship games. But I do not think a team like Arizona State, as hot as they are right now and as good as Boise is, I don't think they should get a bye over several of these other teams. But I also look at like Oregon's trail, Oregon's path to the semifinal. They're going to have to go through Ohio State, probably Texas, just to get to the national title game, which to me is ridiculous for an undefeated conference champion. Whereas you have, I mean, I'll even go through my picks here in a little bit, obviously, but I think Penn State has a decent path to the semifinal. Obviously, Georgia depends on if Carson Beck comes back. I still think they can get to the national title game based on their bracket, even if they don't have Carson Beck. Um, I think Texas Longhorns should be rejoicing. I know we talked preseason that the 5 seed has the world set up for them because the 5 seed was probably either going to be Big Ten runner-up or SEC runner-up, and obviously whoever gets the 4 seed, I don't think can really compete with whoever that is. And again, we'll get to our picks here in just a moment. But any thoughts, any initial thoughts, opinions? I know Turner has a whole rant session coming up about something here, but I just think the 5 seed is the golden spot with 6 very close behind. I think Oregon got absolutely screwed, especially for the season they've had. They literally get rewarded with Ohio State or Tennessee on a neutral field, which I think is pretty wild. So anybody initial thoughts, initial views on the rankings, the field, anything like that?
Yeah, I kind of reiterate what you said. I don't think, like, obviously the conference champions getting like an auto bid, I'm in favor of that, but to like give the automatic bye to Arizona State and Boise State at the 3 and 4 is kind of crazy a little bit. I mean, you end up pushing good teams farther down in the rankings, which then penalizes, like, Oregon in this case at the number 1 seed. So I think just straight seeding it top to bottom, or even potentially reseeding after the first round, might help alleviate some of that. But
Weasel or Turner?
I mean, you look at it, I disagree with both of you. I think that if you win your conference, you should get a bye, but I also think there should be 16 teams. I think 12 is ridiculous. Talk a little bit about why I think 16 in a second, but right now, the way it's set up, reward the teams. You want conference, you get 1 fewer game than everyone else. I think that's a fair reward. As a Texas fan, they don't deserve it. You played 1 good team all year, you lost both times. Like, at the end of the day, you do not deserve the bye. Penn State never won a game. James Franklin, an awful coach, and my boy Andy Kotelnicki, the best Kotelnicki there is. When he needs to call an offense, he forgets how to in a big game. So, I disagree. Penn State and Texas, you lost your conference championship. You don't deserve the bye.
Hey, what are your thoughts on the 16?
I just think 60 because then you can add 4 more teams. Add every conference champion. Throw in Ohio, which, by the way, we're talking for the rant. We're talking about the wrong 3-loss team here. Bama didn't even win their conference. You know who did win their conference? The toughest conference in Division I football, the Ohio Bobcats. Big wins, double-digit win. They avenged a loss from here. They knock off Bowling Green by more points than Penn State did, I think. Maybe that's an inaccurate statement. I don't know. I looked at their schedule earlier, how they got killed by Kentucky. But Bama loses by 3 touchdowns to OU. Why aren't we defending the Bobcats? They had a way tougher strength of schedule. I'd like to see Bama finish undefeated in the MAC. I don't think they could do it. When they're facing a team like Mercer, not real competition.
Mercer's coming to Fargo in a couple days.
And you know what? Those Mercer probably going to get killed by NDSU because they're not very good. And Bama goes out and complains. Why would we schedule good non-conference games? You play Mercer or Chattanooga every year, Bama. Ooh. SMU, at least, they played 2 ranked teams and lost. But 2 losses is less than 3 losses. So I don't understand what the argument is that SMU shouldn't get in. You made your conference championship. Bama by 3 touchdowns. They lost to a Vanderbilt team that I didn't even know could win a football game. One of the greatest days of my life, seeing the stat that Vanderbilt was now 1-80 against the number 1 team. Arguably the greatest college football season of all time. And as my cat attacks me, just a reminder, the MAC is where it really means.
I mean, not only did they lose to Vanderbilt, who turned out to be a decent team. Obviously, Diego had a lot to do with that, but you lose to 6-6 Oklahoma. I correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe I'm not looking at something scheduled. I keep seeing these things on X, Twitter, whatever you call it, about how Bama is going to be super careful with how they schedule their non-conference games. I'm like, you lost to 3 conference teams. I don't know what you're dissecting here.
Bama went undefeated in their non-conference. Played USF. They played Western Kentucky, Wisconsin, who, goodness, they're terrible. And they played Mercer. And then you lose by 3 touchdowns to a team that even Texas beat by 5 scores. And yet we're going to sit here and complain. And then the Bama AD comes out and he's complaining that Bama doesn't get in. I don't understand it. Then you hear in a hypothetical situation, Bama would beat SMU. They couldn't even beat Vandy, Oklahoma, or was it Tennessee, right? Tennessee was their other big loss. Yeah. You lost the games you did play. Why are we making assumptions about the games that you might get to play?
No, to piggyback off your 16, an original thought I had before we even started the season was, you get a bye, but I think you get a short straw in the fact that you don't get a home game. I know if you do the numbers right, if they go to 16, you could have 2 home games. You could play home games in the first 2 rounds and then go to the neutral sites. And I think, again, a bye week, I don't know how much a bye week does for you other than get you healthy. I mean, even after the SEC title game, Kirby Smart, they were celebrating because he said we get 3 weeks forward, 3 weeks off, I think, to get healthy. And I know you can only get so many guys healthy for 3 weeks, depending on injuries and whatnot. And I know that's definitely a benefit, but I think home games in a lot of these places would be awesome too. So I definitely agree that 16 could definitely be helpful.
But it's not just the getting healthy. Think about it. That's the difference between 16 and 17 football games if you play all of them. That's a huge difference for especially these pros. That's a pro football season, and no pro athlete is making it through the season 100% health. You can't expect a 19-year-old to do this.
Weasel, any thoughts on the field, the structure, the format before we get started here?
Not really. We'll make this short since I know we're kind of crunching on time. But I'm glad that we went to the 12 rather than we had the 4. It gets more debate. We can all watch it. Even though that they always have a week off, the bye week won't affect them much more than what they already have. So it helps, but it'll be interesting to see what actually happens.
Yeah, I know. I've also heard the argument. Well, they could do the NFL setup where the bye and you reseed them after the first round based on who won, if there's any upsets, that sort of thing. But even in the NFL, there's only so much benefit to it. There's only so many things you can do to it. Joe Klatt had some really, really good points about how they devalued by trying to value things, especially based on conference championships, on all sorts of things. But okay, here we go. We will get into some picks, so make sure you got your predictions in front of you. I'm going to pull this guy back up. Hopefully you guys can see it. I will start here in the top. I'm starting with Ohio State and Tennessee, which, I mean, you can't get a whole lot more exciting other than throwing some of Turner's MAC teams into one of these rounds, of course. But Ohio State, Tennessee, I think, again, Oregon kind of got the short straw in some of this. I know you obviously have to play the best of the best eventually to win a national title, and I get that. But I would say that a team like Boise has a easier path, in my opinion, to the semifinal. And as some of these analysts are saying, to get the number 1 overall seed, you should have the easiest path to that national title game, regardless of who you have to beat. But anyways, I think this will be a good game. I think it'll be interesting to see what the weather's like and how that plays into two teams that like to throw the ball. I think Tennessee likes to run the ball more than people think. But I think Ryan Day is coaching for his career, and I'm going to take Ohio State to win the first matchup in a nail-biter for Tennessee. The 5-12, good old Clemson going down to Austin. I don't think this game's going to be close at all. I have to look up what the spread is. I want to say it was like 8-9. Maybe it's probably even moved up to something. But I just, as Clemson can be, and I know Texas has shown a lot of weakness. I know Turner's complained to me about how their offense can't move the ball and can't score. And after watching them, I'm like, maybe Texas isn't as good as I thought or as good as the country thought. And I've even heard some analysts this week go, why don't they put Arch Manning in? Because when Quinn Ewers throws the ball downfield, he doesn't really like throw it to a guy. He just throws it to space, and his receivers are good enough to go make a play. So I don't think Texas will have much difficulty with Clemson. I'm going to go up to the state title game between Notre Dame and Indiana. If anybody knows me, they know I don't like Notre Dame. I don't think the weather, regardless of what the weather is going to be, will affect either because they're obviously both from Indiana. And I think Indiana is going to be able to score some points here. And I think Notre Dame, I think obviously it'll be a very competitive game. I think Indiana's going to find a way to stop the run from Notre Dame because that's what they like to do is run the ball with their size up front. And I think they will be able to run the ball, but I think Indiana and Cignetti are going to find ways to score enough to find a way to beat Notre Dame. I know they bickered about Indiana's schedule all year and how not so great it was. And then they played Ohio State and all of a sudden it was better. But if you look at Notre Dame's schedule, they played A&M in the first week. And A&M's not a playoff team. They got better as the season went on, but I don't really think Notre Dame's played that many teams. You can talk about Army, Navy, but all you got to do is defend the triple option with a team that's twice the size as them. So another one I think will be a very good game. I'm very interested to see what SMU looks like against Penn State. Obviously known for a very solid defense and depends on what Kotelnicki wants to do that day on offense. But I don't think the ACC was very strong this year. I also think irritates me that they gave Penn State the big noon kickoff game again because they got whiteout. I think the crowd is going to win this game for Penn State. I think it'll be a good game, but I think the atmosphere and the 110,000 people going absolutely bonkers, potentially in the snow and some nasty weather will be the difference, and I'll take Penn State there. Going up to another good game, a rematch, of course. I think Oregon's just too balanced. They're fast, they're athletic, they're just talented. I think Ohio State has this loaded team with loaded talent, but it almost makes me nervous to pick that because it's really tough to beat a really good team twice. But I do think Oregon takes care of business, and I almost said it's kind of like an Oregon home game, but it's definitely not an Oregon home game. It's just on the West Coast. I also have questions about how they set these bowls up. I should have mentioned that before, but why isn't Georgia picking the Peach Bowl? Like, why did they pick the Sugar? Is there something like they're tired of playing in the Peach Bowl because they play in it like 17 times a year? I do not understand this. I'm also confused, and I know I know in the NCAA basketball tournament, they go based on the 1 seeds and they get to pick their region. So I'm sure obviously Oregon's picking the Rose Bowl. I don't know why. I'm sure there's reason to it why Georgia didn't pick the Peach Bowl so they can play in their backyard. But Arizona State, my heart breaks for Arizona State fans because they missed a golden opportunity to play in their backyard in the Fiesta Bowl. That would have been amazing to have all those Sun Devils fans pack into the Fiesta Bowl. That would have been solid. So, going on to the Peach Bowl with Texas and Arizona State. I think Arizona State is on an absolute roll, but I think Texas's D-line and their size and their skill are going to be able to slow down Scatterbo, and they will take down the Big 12 champs. I think this game will be closer than people think it would be. I'm curious what the spread on this. I'm curious what the difference in spreads between this game and this game would be, because I'm sure they'll be similar. But I do think Texas will take care of business. I go up here, and this one gets interesting. Well, I want to say interesting. Depends on how healthy Carson Beck is, but they already proved in the SEC title game that they're still just better than everybody else, regardless of who is at quarterback. I laugh at the whole comparison that Florida State fans are making. Well, why did they get in? Because they're not sure about their quarterback. Their quarterback doesn't run their team. Their quarterback has so much help and talent and skill around him. He doesn't run their team like Jordan Travis does. And after watching Indiana and Ohio State, I just think Georgia, and especially an SEC team, will be way too much for Indiana to handle. So Indiana's dream season comes to an end in the Sugar Bowl against Georgia. This one gets really interesting for me. I thought about it. I made a pick, and then I changed my pick, and then I went back to my original one. Some Penn State and Boise State action. Obviously, Boise State runs through Ashton Jeanty. I watched them play UNLV in the Mountain West title game and noticed that they're just a good team overall. It's not just, obviously, Jeanty does a lot of the work because he's super talented. And as he said in one of his press conference interviews, that these teams literally are like set up to try to stop me, and they still can't do it. And it makes, again, interesting pick for me here. But I think Penn State's defense is going to find a way to not stop him, but slow him down enough to win a football game. I definitely don't think Penn State is one of the 4 best teams in the country. But again, the way this bracket sets up, Penn State and James Franklin could be in for some happiness. Well, until the next one. Another interesting one, I think. I'm going to take Oregon in this one. I just think they're too balanced. They're just loaded everywhere. I know Texas is talented, and I'm curious to see if Ewers continues on playing or if they test out Arch Manning. Maybe the Texas fan on this call will have opinions and thoughts about that and deeper knowledge. But I'm going to take Oregon, Dan Lanning and the Ducks, and Dylan Gabriel to take down the Longhorns in the semifinal, which hurts all the Longhorns because they will be stopped in another semifinal. I think much like the Georgia-Indiana game, I think Georgia will be way too much for Penn State, and we all know that James Franklin, even though I've picked them to win 2 games in this bracket against lesser opponents, technically, I think Georgia will be way too much for the Nittany Lions. And in the title game, the Oregon Ducks win their first national championship in program history behind Dylan Gabriel and the rest of his solid Ducks squad. I think, especially if Carson Beck is not playing, I think that might catch up to him because of how balanced and how fast Oregon is. But those are my picks. Let's go on to Matt. Matt, what you got? You can list off your analysis and your picks, and I'll fill them as we go.
All right. So starting with the Ohio State-Tennessee game, again, I think this is going to be a really good game. I think it'll be a close game. Both teams have kind of been inconsistent and had their struggles. I think kind of depends on who can put it together the best on offense. Ultimately, I think Ohio State's the better team, and they end up getting the better of Tennessee in this one.
Okay.
And moving on, I have Texas beating Clemson. I agree. I don't think it'll be particularly close. I think Clemson and the ACC in general hasn't looked as good, and so I think Texas handles them easily. Moving up here, Notre Dame and Indiana. I do like Indiana. I think think they've had a good season, but I think Notre Dame has looked better as the season's gone on, and ultimately will get Indiana here. And Penn State and SMU, I think I like Penn State here. I think they have some issues offensively at times, but I think they looked better against Oregon in the championship there than maybe some people thought. So I have them winning. Moving up here, this I think will be a really good game. Ohio State and Oregon. It is tough to beat a team twice, but I think Oregon might be the team with the fewest weaknesses in the bracket. So I have them taking Ohio State here. Again, moving on here. Arizona State has been on fire. Scadaboo's been running the ball lights out, but I think Texas is just the all-around better team. I think they'll be able to take care of business and move on. And Georgia and Notre Dame. I think Georgia is just too good. I know they have the quarterback issues as previously mentioned, but I think they just end up being too much for Notre Dame to handle. Penn State and Boise State. This is one I've flip-flopped on a few times. I think I'm going to go Penn State over Boise State. I think Boise State, the run looks good, but yeah, I think Penn State ends up, they look better on defense than I thought, so I think they end up being able to slow them down. Now the semifinal game, I think this is an interesting game. I think, again, with Oregon being maybe the most complete team, I think they end up getting it done. I think they'll end up just being a little too much. I think it ends up being a really close game. And Georgia, Penn State. Yeah, I think Georgia just, again, going to be too good. I think Penn State's luck runs out in this game. They have a little more than they can handle in a Georgia team there. Now, the championship, another one I've kind of debated on back and forth. I think Oregon having a tougher path to get there. I think they're more battle tested, so I think they ultimately end up coming up on top, plus Georgia with the questions at quarterback. So I think that I have the Ducks winning the championship there.
All right, let's go on up to Mr. Turner Kist. I'm curious where this goes.
I want to make it very clear there are 0 notes around me, so everything I say, top of the noggin. First game, Ohio State, Tennessee. I know it's in the horseshoe, but a lot of stuff I'm reading is saying, you know, Ryan Day, if things go poorly, will he get booed at home? Will the crowd turn on him? Kyler made an interesting point where he said Ohio State's a pass-first team until they played Michigan. They have like 3 first-round receivers, and they decided Chip Kelly looked and he was like halfback dive. That's the move. I'm going to go against these guys and pick Tennessee. I think Nico, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name. He is an absolute fantastic quarterback. Their defense has looked lights out. They took down Georgia this year. I think that is a good, no, not Georgia. They got killed by Georgia. They beat Bama. I want to correct myself. It was Ole Miss beat Georgia. Tennessee, very good team. They have a running game, something Ohio State struggles with. Another game, I'm not saying I disagree with the pick. I disagree with the score. You have 2 teams that cannot play offense. As a diehard Longhorns fan, this year has been painful. You have Steve Sarkisian, one of the best play callers. He faces a good team. Even Kentucky, The man looks like he's never called an offense before. He looks like me calling a JV game in the state of Minnesota. That's what Steve Sarkisian reminds me of. Hey, guys, I'm going to come in with a lot of motion, move it around. Doesn't happen. Big storylines to follow. You have Andrew Makuba, the former Clemson transfer, playing safety for Texas. Could have got a targeting both of the last 2 games, but he will be playing the whole time. And Cade Klubnik, Clemson's QB, returning to the place, returning to his hometown where he once won, I believe, 3 state titles, including beating Quinn Ewers when he was teammates with Michael Taff, the other Longhorn safety. I think at the end of the day, Texas's defense is going to win them that game. I think Texas's defense is going to carry them. At some point, Sark needs to open up the playbook because inside zone and letting Quinn do Quinn Ewers off-target throws to Matthew Golden and letting Isaiah Bond get injured is not going to win you a game or the championship. So that's a little tough, but I do think my Horns come through for that one. Next, this is a tough one. As I saw earlier today for fans of Parks and Rec, this is the Lil Sebastian Bowl because they are playing for the state of Indiana. And something I'm disappointed that was not mentioned, you have Riley Leonard, the former Duke quarterback, whose last game at Duke was a loss to Notre Dame where he injured his ankle, taking on the Ohio Bobcats transfer and fellow Canadian Curtis Rourke, leading the Indiana Hoosiers. At the end of the day, I do think Notre Dame is a way better team, but being that Curtis Rourke is the quarterback for Indiana, I got to pick my former Bobcat and my fellow Canuck. Let's go Hoosiers. Hoosier Daddy. Curtis Rourke is going to lead that as a huge upset that not many people are going to see coming. And quite frankly, I'm excited. I think he's a great quarterback. Keep him on schedule. Keep those passes coming. This one, because everyone else is picking Penn State, and I just really feel like a Kotelnicki losing would make me really happy. I think Penn State has the second best tight end in the nation. The number 1 tight end, of course, is Harold Fannin of which university, in case anyone's curious. Go Falcons. Fannin put up a lot of yards against Penn State, a lot of yards against A&M, a lot of yards throughout the season, something that people are forgetting. Tyler Warren, fantastic tight end. You have Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, fantastic running backs for Penn State. You have the play calling of Andy Kotelnicki, the former UMary assistant who I was once in a hotel room with breaking down film on my visit to UMary before he left the day before signing day for Wisconsin Whitewater. This man was 1 season away from being fired at Buffalo before they got a star quarterback and a star running back. And at the end of the day, they bring in Kotelnicki for a better offense, but they lose to the Mustangs. Let's get that Pony Express rolling. Jennings, great quarterback. I think their last loss was a fluke. They've showed they can compete. I think that's a pretty good athletic team. And because everyone else has picked Penn State, let's go Ponies. Oregon, Tennessee. Oregon's really good. I do have thoughts when I get to Oregon's next round game, which might be unpopular. I'm going to say it right now. Might have an unpopular opinion coming up. I think Oregon, I mean, like you guys said, you got Tez Johnson, you have unbelievable running backs, you have Dylan Gabriel, you have Evan Stewart. Their defense, very athletic, even though they got absolutely torched by Penn State at times. But I think Oregon has way too much talent. I don't think Tennessee's beaten them. I do think Oregon's going to make the semifinals, but that'll probably be it. Texas, Arizona State. Gosh, it terrifies me to watch a team that can pass and throw with the Sun Devils. But I'm going to pick with my heart, not my brain. I know this is the thing. I know Texas is going to let me down. I'm going to be real. They probably lose to Clemson, right? At the end of the day, I'm a Texas fan. No one has ever broken my heart more than the Texas Longhorns. But for the sake of this activity, Horns, they're going to go in. Scattaboo is going to run for like 100 yards, just like Trevor Etienne did. But Texas is going to knock him off. I think Texas, way too much talent. They're not the Iowa State Cyclones. In the battle of former Big 12 versus current Big 12, it's going to the Horns. This one, I don't care who's at quarterback. Georgia, you win. Indiana's going to do nothing offensively that entire game. I watched Indiana play Ohio State. I think Curtis Rourke had 60 total passing yards on the game. Georgia's defense is going to eat him alive. This one, Genty runs for like 300 yards. Madsen throws for 300. Boise State just beats the crap out of SMU, and people finally are like, whoa, SMU's terrible. I do also want to add, James Franklin can't win a big game. That one also might be the game that he wins, though, but I still think SMU first round. Oregon, Texas is the battle of glorified DJ Uyongales. I want to make that very, very clear to everyone, all 5 people that listen to this podcast. Okay, no offense, Kyler. You look at DJ Uyongale's stats, people were ripping him apart. They're like, oh, he throws it behind the line. He doesn't complete it downfield. Has anyone here watched an Oregon or Texas game? It's screens, it's quick slants, it's like one downfield throw the entire game, and it's probably off target if you're Quinn Ewers. And still Matthew Golden makes an unbelievable catch. I think Oregon, you're a great team. I have an Oregon Ducks jersey. I have Oregon Ducks apparel. But my heart is always going to be with the Horns. I think Texas's secondary, I can't believe this phrase is being uttered after watching them get ripped apart by Washington. But Jahdae Barron, Michael Taff, Andrew Makuba, Holmes, you got Anthony Hill, who's going to be bringing the pressure, Colin Simmons, Trey Moore on the outside, Dylan Gabriel, good luck getting passes off. The Horns pull it off. They make the championship. And you guessed it, Kyler, I know you know what's coming. Give me round 3. Give me Georgia, Texas, round 3 in the Natty. Genty, you take on Georgia. He still probably runs for $150 on 70 carries. They're not going to do anything but give him the football. He's going to break Barry Sanders' record. But my goodness, Georgia's going to make it. And in the championship, Steve Sarkisian, it's your 3rd chance to run an offense against Georgia. He still can't do it. They're going to be terrible. But George is even worse offensively. The score is going to be like 10-3, and the Horns are returned to glory. As Sam Ehlinger said, we're back, baby. You're 2025 national champs. Even though deep down I know they're losing first round to Clemson. Put it down right there. Horns are taking it. They're back. Arch Manning probably gets the 1 touchdown in that game too.
That was legendary stuff there, man. Hoofda. Good luck following that one, Weasel.
Yeah, thank you for that, Turner. My gosh.
All right, Weasel, let's get to it with.
How do I top that? Well, first off, I love Tennessee. Went to one of their games, blew out UTEP 56-0, I believe what it was. I did actually not choose Tennessee this time. I think Ohio State is big enough to actually outdo Tennessee for the game at home in Ohio State. It's going to be interesting. Hopefully not too cold. No, it's going to be cold this week. And then moving on down to the Texas and Clemson. This is one of those games where you think Texas should easily win. I'm not sure what the spread is, maybe 9-10. And there's a lot of thought on getting Clemson. They're good. They become hot at the end of the season. Does that continue? But I chose Texas. I think Texas overall is a better team. They can throw Clemson off. Clemson they've had their off moments throughout the season. Coming over to the Fighting Irish. I chose the Fighting Irish actually over Indiana. I think it's going to be a closer game than what people are expecting. I think that game could possibly go down to a field goal, like Turner said. Indiana, he thinks it might actually be the upset. Moving down to Penn State, I took Penn State. I think they've got a little more depth, a little more experience than SMU. And there's a reason why they're ranked 6th. I think the committee is right on that one. They got an easier way to get the path all the way forward. Oregon and Ohio State. I actually took Oregon in this one, given that they're going to have a bye. I think Ohio State, they're going to be possibly a little bit whipped by Tennessee in the beginning. So I think Oregon will overall win. Texas and ASU. I'm thinking Texas on this one. They're just all around a better team, I think, even though ASU has got that 4 seed. Not sure. I don't like the seeding on that point as well. So I agree with all you guys on that one. Georgia wins this, I think possibly by 10. even though they're having like quarterback issues, second quarterback, backup quarterbacks, and they're just at the beginning of the season. I thought they were more like an NFL team than actually Oregon was. Penn State and Boise State. I thought Boise State is more of a one-dimensional team, but they've had their off games, so I also took Penn State to win this game as well. What else we got here? What's left? I think Turner might be happy with this one. He's following his heart with that Texas, and I think Texas wants another shot with Georgia. So I actually think Texas wins and beats Oregon in that neutral setting. And then Georgia down to Penn State. Georgia has depth, even though they had that quarterback issue. So I also think for the third time this year, Texas will be playing Georgia. But this time, the first time they lost by 15, second time they lost by 3. I think Texas overall wins this one. They finally figured it out. It only takes 3 times. It's hard to beat a team 3 times, right, guys?
All that I'm hearing is that Texas is not going to win the national title now. Book them.
I appreciate that.
Book them, boys. I even got my Texas Snuggie up. Look at that.
Nice. All right. So to recap, my computer would stop glitching. For the most part, we got Matt and Kyler with Oregon, Georgia, with Oregon winning both. And Weasel and Turner, we got Texas and Georgia, and Texas winning both. So we got a pretty solid left side of the bracket, which I almost said it definitely is. But, I mean, there's strengths and weaknesses on both. I think this is going to be exciting. So I know I went off on my own rant with the bowl games. I was anticipating, obviously, when I looked at the quarterfinal games, because they go by seed, they go obviously they asked the school, whoever gets 1, where they'd like to go. Obviously, Oregon's going to the Rose Bowl. I'm still a little confused, unless Georgia's just tired of playing in the Peach Bowl, why they took the Sugar Bowl. Unless there's no way it's geographically closer to the Sugar Bowl than the Peach Bowl. There's no way.
The big thing, I think, is if it's essentially a home game, they don't let them do it, because that was the big thing they talked about for Arizona State, was like, you can't just play in the Fiesta Bowl.
Okay, that makes sense. And then I'm sure, I don't know if this plays into it, but obviously they could maybe predict that Texas gets to the semis, so maybe that's why they put the Orange Bowl over. I don't know, but that makes a lot of sense. I know when they interviewed the ASU head coach before selection, he was very, very set on the fact that they were going to get in the Fiesta Bowl and just pack that place with Sun Devil fans, which would have been awesome. But obviously that's not how it works, and maybe that's another. Well, they're the 4 seed, so they got whatever was left over. But Boise actually got a solid draw there too, going down to Arizona. That's not a far jaunt. So these games start on the 20th. I believe the Notre Dame game is first. I know Penn State plays the noon game that Saturday, and followed by the other ones. So
Texas is at 3 on TNT, which is just terrible.
It could be worse. You can play at noon. Everyone hating on big noon kickoff is my favorite. Like, Penn State would be undefeated if we played at night, which might be accurate, actually. But, all right, any other thoughts from anybody on this upcoming shenanigans? Turner, did you get your rant in, or did we miss something?
Yeah, I got to talk about Ohio. That was the extent of the rant. It wasn't too serious. The thing that I do want to add, though, what I really hate about this season is that you have Ryan Day, who's essentially the Saban of James Franklin, right? And he gets 2 top 5 wins because of it. But now his resume is boosted. If Penn State beats SMU, now James Franklin gets another ranked win. And it's not right to me that you let them play a ranked opponent. Because we know that if you rank a team too high, they're going to pull it off because their team's better. And now they have a better winning percentage when they're not a good coach. Ryan Day was born on third base. And when he came out, he said that the worst thing that's ever happened to him is losing to Michigan. Genuinely question that man's sanity. He's watching his players get in a fight, and he's just standing there. Also, can we just talk about flag planting? I love Steve Sarkisian. What a legend. He comes out and he says, we're not going to plant a flag because we want respect. Texas planted 3 flags this year for the A&M or 2 for 2. Michigan and Oklahoma, and I'm like, yeah, we draw the line on rivalry week when players are getting pepper sprayed. Nice.
Yeah, you know. Well, I think J.J. Watt said it best. If you don't want someone planting a flag on your logo, don't lose.
It's bad
Like,
when
do I think it's wrong? Probably. Do I think it's disrespectful? The representation? Probably. But if you don't want it to happen, then don't lose. In basketball, if you don't want a court storming on the road, don't lose.
it's bad when Booger McFarland makes the most sense on an ESPN panel.
Oh gosh, he made sense at some point.
He made more sense than Nick Saban did listening to the playoff reveal and talking about flag planting. I was like,
All right. Well, thank you guys for jumping on for another solid predictions. Hopefully these predictions go better than our preseason ones. But, we don't know anything in preseason. We know a couple things now, but super excited to see it, no matter how flawed this system currently is. And the more I watch things from experts and people who look at data and the BCS, there's one guy that podcast, he's like, we should just do the BCS, just put Oregon and Georgia in it. But I also, on that note, I also love this because you get these bowl games and nobody is going to opt out unless there's some weird transfer thing going on, which I highly doubt if you get to play in the playoff. But obviously more than half of these that weren't in because you just have the 2 semifinals and the national championship game just takes place at one of the New Year's Six. They don't actually label it a bowl game. But I do think this is going to help a lot in the players not opting out. Obviously, you're going to have plenty of problems in the other bowl games, but that's for the future to come. I do think they should reseed this next year, but we'll see what they do. So thanks for jumping on. And that is the conclusion of our predictions.